Hey guys, what's up? It is Public back with another video coming to you from the Shadowlands beta. Today we're going to be looking at Conduits and Soulbinds, specifically the things that you get from choosing a specific covenant. This kind of unlocks the entire covenant tree for you. Remember that a covenant is more than just the two abilities that we went over in the last video. You also get access to all these various Soulbinds and their actual conduit trees and the various combinations that come with them. So in this video we're going to go over how that system works, what it looks like today on beta, and then I'm going to walk through each one of the specific priest soulbinds and conduits and what those mean. And then finally, we're going to walk through, some of these paths and trees that you can take and what some of these builds look like in the game that we currently have access to in beta. All right, let's get started. Okay, guys, first things first in this video, I want to go over how the actual soulbind system works. So I'm on my vampire priest here that I have here, which is in the Venthyr Covenant. You can see each of these kind of covenant sanctum halls gives you this Forge of Bonds that you have access to. And this is where you can actually see and edit your soulbinds here. So if you don't know soulbinds, you're actually binding yourself to an NPC in the game that gives you access to their specific tree. So for the Venthyr Covenant, you have Nagia, Theotar, and General Draven. Each one of these are actually attuned to a specific type of kind of soulbind or conduit-esque things. So they're either going to be a throughput option, a defensive option, or a utility option. And what I mean by that is if I go to General Draven right here, you can see that I have a maximum of 1, 2, 3 defensive conduits, whereas it's impossible for me to get 3, say, throughput conduits or utility conduits. So General Draven is kind of classified as my defensive option, because if I want to whole hog into defensive, that is the tree for that. Theotar is in the utility option, because I can pick 3 finesse slots in a given tree path here. And then Nadia is the kind of throughput option, giving me access to 3 throughput conduit abilities. And so that's kind of how their system works. And inside the system, if we go ahead and reset this guy right here, you're given some choices on what you want to do. Some of them affect your throughput. Some of them give you an option to slot in an external conduit. So if we kind of walk through Nadia real quick here just to show you how this works, I can either choose this first option, which is Agent of Chaos. My Door of Shadows ability disorients all nearby enemies at the target location, or I get move speed after using that ability. So you kind of get these two options here. But notice if I take this option on the left, I can then slot in a throughput conduit, which I already have right here. That's why there's something here. I can go ahead and get rid of that so you can show that. Oh, I guess I can't remove it on beta. Fun. So I can actually choose a throughput conduit to put in here and then continue on the tree. But if I want to get the defensive option, I had to go over here, and then I would actually miss out on this because you can't go backwards in the tree. You can only go further down it. So then you get met with more decisions here. You have to take these two options to progress further. But then you're left with an option of, hey, do you want to slot in a utility conduit, a throughput conduit, or a defensive conduit here? Now, if you choose to say, hey, yeah, I want the throughput conduit here because I want more throughput, then you're met with, on all 3 of these, you're forced into the next option to proceed in the tree. So if I pick this throughput option, I then have to select this guy, which is duration of incoming interrupt, snare, and root effects are reduced by 25%. However, if I would have chosen the finesse slot or the endurance slot on the right here, notice the 2 abilities directly after those are throughput based, right? So I could have said, hey, well, I'm actually only going to use 2 throughput, because I really like this throughput ability that the that the soulbind gives me, which this one increases the benefits of well-fed flask and weapon enchants by 15%. Pretty good. This other one on the defensive side makes the first enemy I damage in combat take 4% more damage to just them, and 2% less damage to myself. So you can see they're trying to pair up a DPS option with a kind of utility tree immediately after, or if you select a utility conduit, you're then met with a throughput soulbind ability as a way to kind of balance things out. So we'll see how that works out. Time will tell on the balancing with that. And then you continue on the tree, and this is what I have here, right? And now I can activate any of these guys 3 if I'm at the forge. And if you're inside of a rest area, you can swap between these guys kind of at whim. If you have a tome, presumably this will work the same way. But if I'm not at the forge here, you notice I cannot change the tree here. So once you've selected the tree at the forge, that's how it is. I'd have to go back to the forge to change anything up here. So unsure if they're going to change that for now, but that's how that works currently. And then basically the only thing left with the system is the various conduits that I can slot into my trees to kind of customize it myself. Now, in a recent interview, Ian did mention that currently the system works where if I say I have this endurance slot, I want to put it in. Well, I've now used that conduit and it's disappeared, right? It's only in here and I can't remove it or move it around, right? It's a kind of temporary or destructive system. But Ian did mention that that is something they're reconsidering and rethinking. So time will tell how that will work, if it'll either be like kind of like the Essence library system or how glyphs used to work or things like that, or if it will be somewhat like a relic system. Not quite sure yet, but just know that they are thinking about changing that. Okay, guys, so that is the quick overview of how the Soulbind system works. So with that out of the way, let's actually deep dive into our specific conduit abilities. Okay, guys, so now let's go through each one of the shadow-specific conduits that we have available to us currently on beta. Unsure if we'll get more added in the future, if these will be tweaked, but I just want to kind of give my initial feedback for each one of these, talk about some pitfalls that I've seen or some that look cool, and kind of walk through where they might make sense. So first things first, I'm going to go over the ones that are specific to Shadow. There are other ones kind of more tailored towards Holy or Disc, but these are kind of the Shadow targeted ones. So first things first, we're going to go over is the Dissonant Echoes conduit. This is kind of quote unquote the Void Bolt conduit. So Void Bolt has an X% chance to reset the cooldown on Void Bolt. And they have mentioned that these conduits are scaling with item level. So there is a specific number on each conduit that changes as it gets higher in item level. So this conduit right here, the X% chance is the thing that is scaling with item level. So right now, the base eye level that we have access to on beta is eye level 155, which gives us a 5% chance to reset the cooldown on Void Bolt. So some of these guys have different numbers that do, some do get changed as they increase the eye level, others are static. So I'll try and highlight where those differences are. In the tooltips, though, you can kind of distinguish this right now based on which numbers show up as normal green text or which of them have been changed to be white. And that's how you can tell. So with this Void Bolt conduit, again, right off the bat here, not the best thing in the world. It's got a very low chance to start out with, which, kind of is interesting. But effectively, it's randomly introducing change in our rotation, which typically has been very consistently static of, I cast one Void Bolt, 2 GCDs, and then another Void Bolt. And you kind of progress through that until you get a ton of haste. And that's kind of how the shadow rotation has worked for quite some time now. So this does kind of throw in a random loop with that sometimes. The biggest problem with this conduit, and this needs to get changed as soon as possible if it stays in the game, is that this actual proc chance only happens when Void Bolt actually hits your target. The problem with this is that means you might not get the Void Bolt reset until a GCD or 2 out from when you've casted that original Void Bolt because of the travel time of the spell, right? So if I'm standing max range away from the target, it might take, full GCD and a half for me to recognize that. And so this makes it really, really challenging to react to this ability. And you might, and since, Void Bolt has a pretty short cooldown in general, especially at high haste levels, you could easily just, skip over the proc entirely because you started channeling a Mind Flay or started casting a Mind Blast at high levels of haste, basically rendering the effect of this, DPS neutral. So now you can just stand, right in front of your target, and that does help with this, but in reality, in my opinion, this should just get changed to on cast rather than on hit of your target. That'd be a quick fix for this conduit. Okay, so moving on to the next one, we have Shimmering Apparitions. So this guy works with our Auspicious Spirits. And basically, and this is the weirdest one, it kind of inverses it. So typically we get a Shadow Apparition chance to proc when we get a critical strike of Shadow Word Pain. But this reverses that, saying when you don't get a crit with Shadow Word Pain, you have a chance to create a Shadowy Apparition, basically giving you 2 chances to create the proc. The only problem with this is, naturally with Shadow Priest, as we get more crit, we get more Shadowy Apparitions, which is kind of how it works, right? But with this effect actually gets worse as you get more crit, right? So if you add more crit, you have less chances to proc this guy. So this has a weird anti-synergy with getting more gear in that, adding more crit to your character if you're using this conduit could actually be a slight DPS loss or DPS neutral because you're theoretically getting less chances to proc this guy. So right off the bat, it's a very weird conduit. I don't think this will actually get used very much in general. Now, if it's something you get at, low crit levels, then sure, why not? But, naturally Shadow Priests tend to really like haste and crit, so this kind of has a bit of an anti-synergy with that. So not a big fan of this guy. Moving on, we have Rabid Shadows. So this is the kind of Shadow Fiend conduit. Shadow Fiend attack speed is increased by 20%, and it deals X% more damage. Noting again, the X is what would scale. So this is actually really strong if you pair it with all the Night Fate Conduit, the legendary that reduces the cooldown of Shadow Fiend and Mindbender. So this is kind of one of those kind of set and forget it conduits. It doesn't really change how you play it all, but it can be really strong if paired with the other things in that build, although who knows how much of that will stay. And the next guy, and this is the last one that's kind of shadow specific from a throughput perspective, is a Mind Devourer. Mind Blast deals an additional X% damage and has a static 5% chance to make your next Devouring Plague cost no insanity. So when playing this in like an open world environment, I did notice this proccing very often, but if you sit on a target dummy for several minutes, you do actually notice this happening like, I don't know, once or twice every Void Form or so, which actually feels kind of cool. It's weird to give Devouring Plague kind of a purpose with in our rotation, specifically from a Conduit, because casting Devouring Plague in Void Form without this is so detrimental to the spec and typically will never be done. But making it cost no insanity gives that incentive to cast it in Void Form and actually gives you some reasonable uptime. The only weird part is that, the proc chance is static. But even with that, at higher haste levels, you're going to be casting more Mind Blasts. So, as we get more gear, this should proc more and more often. And you can actually see some pretty decent uptime of the Devouring Plague dot. It has recently been buffed. So right now, this trait's actually looking to be the one of the most impactful and the most damage increasing conduits that we have. So definitely feels like a no-brainer to slot this in no matter what you're doing right now. But we'll see how the numbers tune out. Okay, so that's all the shadow throughput effects. Let's go ahead and move on to the finesse conduits, or the utility ones that we have access to. First things first, we have mental recovery. After Psychic Scream ends, affected target's movement speed is reduced by X% for 5 seconds. Nice to have. I mean, it's an interesting thing. I don't really have a use case off the top of my head, but move speed that's somewhat on demand with you casting a fear is nice to see. Power Run to others. The next one, casting Power Infusion on an ally reduces its cooldown by X seconds. Again, I don't particularly like that there are conduits that are kind of giving us a reason to cast Power Infusion on others as a Shadow Priest, but here we are. I will say that if you're using the Power Infusion legendary, which if you haven't seen, if you cast Power Infusion on someone else, you also get Power Infusion. Works really well with this trait. It's almost like if you're using that legendary, you should use this conduit. So a bit of a synergy there. And note that as we get a higher eye level of this conduit, that part will scale. Next on, we have a move with Grace. Levitate grants X% increased movement speed. It's actually pretty sweet. Right now in alpha, the base base eye level of this is giving us 20% move speed. So you move pretty freaking fast with this. Neat. I'm not going to complain about more movement speed as a Shadow Priest. It's awesome. And then the last finesse conduit that we have is Clear Mind. Dispel Magic, Purify, and Mass Dispel cost X% less mana. Fine with me. Great. Love it. They already cost too much in my opinion, so I'm glad that they reduced these from a conduit. Not going to complain. And that is the finesse ones that we have. And next up, we have the endurance or defensive options. So first up, we have Charitable Soul. This will look really familiar to you because it's the same thing as the last one. Dispel Magic, Purify, and Mass Dispel cost X% less mana. And just note, conduits are unique, so you can't stack any of these. But you can add this Endurance Charitable Soul with the Finesse Clear Mind to get double mana reduction on these dispels, which, cool. I mean, kind of weird. This kind of feels like a little bit of an oversight. I was surprised to see these overlap, but that's what we got. Translucent Image is for the next 2 seconds of Fade, you take X% less damage. Note that 2-second part is static, so as it scales with eye level, it's still only at 2 seconds. So kind of weird. It's a very short duration. I would have assumed it would be the entire duration of Fade. The fact that it's not makes this not useless, but you have to have a pretty quick reaction time if you're trying to reduce incoming damage, unless it's like a dot ticking on you or something. So kind of a weird one. I feel like this needs to get tuned better, but it's the only defensive option that we have in the endurance category, so it is what it is. And then the last one that we have is Light's Inspiration. Desperate Prayer heals you for an additional X% of the amount it healed for of your max HP over 5 seconds. So again, you get more healing from Desperate Prayer. The fact that we have Desperate Prayer back in the game to begin with this Shadow is awesome. So either this one or the Charitable Soul is probably what I'm going to use most of the time, unless Fade gets buffed, but that's what we have so far. Okay, so these are all the kind of generic or pre-specific ones that we have now. But in addition to these, each covenant has its own conduit as well. So, Necrolord has one, Venthyr has one, Kieran and Night Fate each have their own specific ones that buff the covenant ability that they give you, further enhancing it. Most of these are just kind of flat numbers, but I want to bring them up anyways. So starting off with the Necrolord one, which is Festering Transfusion. This buffs Unholy Transfusion, which is the dot that gets put on targets or allies. And it makes it just last longer and deal more damage or healing. And that's pretty it. So it just makes it better. This will just come down to a numbers tuning thing, right? There's no interaction here. It's just, is this better than what other things are on your tree? And that's just, sim it and figure it out. I don't like that. I don't want to have to be able to sim my character to know what's better or know what I want to play with, but this is literally just a numbers thing, so we'll see how it works out. Venthyr, somewhat similar. It's called Shattered Perceptions. Mind Games lasts an additional 20 seconds and deals an additional X% damage or healing. This is good and bad. The fact that it lasts longer actually solves one of the big problems I have with Mind Games baseline, in that, if your target isn't attacking when you cast it on them, you'll never get the insanity from this. But the fact that they made the debuff longer somewhat solves the problem, or at least walks around the problem, because basically you just have longer to break a shield, which is important to Shadow Priest, because breaking that absorb is how we get the insanity back from this. So this is also a great conduit. You're probably going to end up wanting to use this if you have taken the Venthyr ability, just to make it more useful, but time will tell how good it actually becomes. The Kieran ability, Courageous Ascension, buffs Ascended Blast, which is the ability that replaces Mind Flay by an additional X% damage, so that scales. And then it buffs Ascended Eruption, which is the thing that bursts at the end of Boon of the Ascended, for additional 1% damage per stack of Boon of the Ascended. So again, this doesn't change how you use the ability, but it does make it hit harder. So there you go. And then last but not least, this is the Night Fate Conduit, which I've talked about a little bit, both on the forums and other videos. It's called Blessing of Plenty. So Fey Blessing effects right now on on beta, it's showing that it affects 15 additional spells, which is pretty wild. Considering baseline, it only affects 10. So I think this is a typo. The fact it goes from 10 to adding 15 up to a total of 25 seems pretty ridiculous, considering you probably can't even get off that many Void Bolts during the window, so you have to mix in other spells. So I think this means go from 10 to 15, but who knows? We're still waiting on that guy. And then enhances the abilities further, which for Shadow Priest is Power Word Shield, Shadow Mend, or Void Bolt. Now have a X% chance to reduce the cooldown of the Fey Blessing ability by X seconds. This is really weird to test with, since part of it just isn't working right now, but the baseline ability that we have now is you get an extra 15 seconds, or a 15% chance to reduce it by 15 seconds, and the way that this works is basically you use Fey Blessings, use all of your abilities, which if you cast 10 Void Bolts, that gives you 10 chances to reduce the cooldown. And then after you've consumed the buff is when the cooldown starts, and the cooldown will actually show a lower duration if you've gotten a proc within that window. So it basically stores any of these procs and then uses them up. With the crazy Mindbender build that I've gone into detail about in the forums and in Discord, this guy is effectively almost a requirement, because it helps you get an even higher uptime of Mindbender and get more of these cooldown reductions out. Although hopefully Blizzard, is listening and starts to rethink that, because I think this conduit paired with that actual ability is going to get pretty silly, especially when you add in the legendary effect. So if you want more info on that build that I'm talking about, I'll link the forum post in the description. It's safe to say it's a doozy. So yeah. And guys, that is all the conduits that we have access to. I know it's a lot to think about, a lot to take in. I don't know if there are more coming, but that's what we have access to now. All right, guys, I've been rambling a lot about this Conduit and Soulbind system, so I'm going to kind of cut the video a little short here and kind of, spark a conversation about which one of these you guys like, which ones you think don't work. Please give your feedback. I've posted a large forum post about Covenant specifically. I plan to do another one similar to all of these guys as well, because a lot of them are, frankly, either really boring or broken or kind of crazy to me. Some of them make sense, but the system as a whole is kind of looking a little iffy to me right now. And in addition, you pair this with all of the active Soulbind abilities that we get on each tree that have a wide array of abilities. I'm going to put a few of them on the screen now. You can see there's kind of a wide array of things available to us, whether they're, cheat death mechanics, whether it's increasing our haste or other things like that. A lot of these effects are kind of crazy, and the combinations are, frankly, not quite endless, but there's a lot of different ways you can kind of spec out your character that do kind of change depending on the covenant that you've chosen. So this system has a lot of crazy combinations that you can rack up together. So determining which one's best is going to be almost near impossible, but there will be kind of good lanes to choose from in each covenant kind of row. So in a future video, once these things are more specced out and, actually implemented in the game, I might do a video of like, for each covenant, here's, General Draven's path that I like. Here's the one I don't like, things like that. But unfortunately right now, a lot of them on alpha are still kind of either not yet implemented or coming soon, or they've been changed or tweaked a lot in this kind of beta cycle that we've been in. So I don't want to comment or speculate on them too much, as they've changed quite frequently already, but just know there is a future video coming on all the interactions with these guys, right? So thanks for watching, guys, as always, and if there's something else you want to see, leave a comment below of that video, and I'll be sure to get that out there. All right, guys, have a good one. Thanks for watching.